Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Apples Ginos Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the podcast you come to when you're finally ready to take fantasy hockey seriously. My name is Groot Nibbelink. I'm the creator of Apples Ginos, originator of the Zero G draft strategy, and in this podcast, I'm going to talk about some of the biggest hotshots and have-nots of the early season. Let's get it. Hello, everybody. Unfortunately, I am without your friend and my best friend, Blake Creamer. Blake and I are in a bit of an orbiting pattern currently. We seem to never collide at the opportune moments, but have no fear. We will collide once again, and it will be spectacular when it does. Hopefully, week 2 went well for everyone. Hopefully, it went a little better than my week. I won three out of my 5 leagues, so 3-2 is not too bad. 4-1 in the opening week, so we're getting there. But APL is proving to be my toughest test. I'm 0-2 there to start the season, so got to bring that back around, and we will. But it's definitely exciting to be playing some of the best fantasy hockey that I've ever played in the APL this year. Hope that all of you listening who are in the APL are having a similar experience. Let's not waste any time. Let's jump right into some Newsies. Off the top, we got Shane Gostisbehere. Gostisbehere tweaked something, according to Rod Brindamore, and that is pretty much all we know. So that can mean a wide range of things for Gostisbehere. Worth noting that Counter Miller got on the top power play in his place, and so it's just a place where you have to watch out for Gostisbehere. Follow the news. Probably we get something more reasonable for our purposes in fantasy on Monday, and you'll have a better idea what to do with him at that point. Unfortunately, that does leave you without knowing what to do, whether he'll be missing some time, whether you can use that roster spot for a streaming situation early in the week, but that is the situation with Gostisbehere at the moment. Darcy Kemper's day-to-day skated Saturday, so it doesn't really feel like a concern for anything long-term here, but his status is still up in the air. Jonathan Marchessault also day-to-day with a lower body injury. Doesn't sound like it's too serious, but missed that latest game for Nashville there. Mark Stone is injured. I know everybody's shocked. Left Saturday's game, looked like a wrist injury, according to some witnesses there. Bruce Cassidy said he hopes to know more on Monday. Lucas Raymond came back to the Detroit lineup on Sunday, but Patrick Kane was out with an uppy body injury. And so they just kind of traded places, and Detroit still won. Detroit a wagon, ? In the early going this year. In tough news, Philip Hedl got absolutely lit up by Tom Wilson. If you haven't seen the hit already, was a little bit on the late side, but it was a clean hit for what it's worth. From what I could see, it looks like shoulder to the chest, but definitely a little late, and Hedl was not looking at it at all, so he was totally caught unawares. And obviously Hedl has a long history of concussions, and so you hope that there wasn't any of that going on, just whiplash and whatever else. When you've had that many concussions, it's no joke. So hopefully everything will be okay for Hedl in the long run. He left the game. It happened in the first period. He left the game and did not return. So prayers up for Philip Hedl at this point. Brock Besser missed that same game against the Capitals for personal reasons. We don't know anything more than that. So it's not like he's been, put in the player assistance program. Sometimes players will use that if they have, some personal reasons to be away from the team for a more extended period. So hopefully it's a short-term situation there for Besser, but a tough run out for anyone who is hoping for that Besser game on Sunday. Kim Gooley to miss 4 to 6 weeks for your banger leagues. Lower body injury there. We don't know much more. Mackenzie Blackwood is off his conditioning stint in the AHL, but he did not back up Scott Wedgwood on Saturday, so that kind of leaves his status very much up in the air still. So he's with the team, but Trent Miner was still the backup. I'm not sure where that leaves him moving into next week, if he's going to require even more time, practice time to get up to NHL game speed, but he is with the team now. And lastly here, Pierre-Luc Dubois is on injured reserve until Tuesday, but he has been skating since Friday, so it feels like most likely scenario is that he actually is back for that Tuesday game that the Capitals have against Seattle. Will remain to see whether he immediately goes back on the top power play. It feels most likely like he will, and that for me is solely based on the fact that they were using some combination of Sonny Milano and Ryan Leonard in his place on the top power play. They didn't go to Jacob Chychrun, who I would consider a stronger candidate to actually take that role from PLD, considering they gave him that run in the playoffs last year and times early already in the season, if not earlier in the preseason. So all that to say, I think that PLD is a good candidate to walk right back into a top power play role upon return. All right, that's it for the Newsies. Let's get into some hot shots. We've got the same segment that you know and love from last year coming back at you this year. Hot shots, basically just checking in with a bunch of the hottest players in the NHL and just seeing what we can find out about their underlying stats and whether we think any of this is sustainable. So right up top, we got to talk about this Vegas trio that's absolutely been lighting things up. Jack Eichel, Mark Stone, Pavel Dorofeyev. Eichel has, in 6 games, compiled 5 goals and 10 assists for 15 points. Just unbelievable stuff, really. 2.5 points per game, 205 points, 82 game pace for Jack Eichel. Mark Stone has 13 points of his own in 6 games, obviously dealing with that injury, as I mentioned before. And then Pavel Dorofeyev has 6 goals and 7 points in 6 games, 82 goal pace for Pavel Dorofeyev. So, yeah, they have been playing pretty well, all things considered. Jack Eichel is shooting a lot more, which is the number one thing I want to note off the top here. Ranks 3rd in the league in shots per 60, and that's with an average time on ice of nearly 21 minutes. So Jack Eichel is going back to his shooting ways, it seems, in the early going here. That's something Blake was big on. I was less sure about that. We had a lot of back and forth about that, and when we talked about Vegas as a team in the preseason, early returns are that Jack Eichel is shooting a lot more. So that's exciting if you got Jack Eichel. There are some teams out there that got Jack Eichel and Jack Hughes at the back end of the first, early second, and those teams are probably loving life right about now. Then for Mark Stone, obviously don't know the extent of the injury there yet, and let's just assume for the purposes of conversation that he's back very soon and he reprises his role in the power play in the top line with Eichel. I think he's a good player, right? I don't think he is going to, score 40 goals, but he can be around the 30-goal mark. I think he can approach the 70-point mark. I think all those things still hold true. He's obviously, when it comes to any of this, both of them are riding some pretty unsustainable percentages, both in the high 80s in IPP, on-ice shooting percentage around 20% for both of them. So just some truly ridiculous stuff in that front, and that will obviously come down. So not saying that that's going to keep up, but definitely 2 players that are doing very well for themselves in the early going. And yeah, I don't see no reason to say that it's going to slow down a ton. I think it's a good sign for them. I think if I were reprojecting them for the rest of the season today, assuming health, then I would project them higher than I had them at the start of the season. So good notes there on Eichel and Stone. For Dorofeyev, love to see that he's back on the power play and firing pucks. 18 minutes average time on ice on the season so far. That's a good sign as well. They have been trying him with Marner and Hurdle on that line, which is something that I posited they might do in the offseason. I like the look of that line, and we'll see if they continue to roll with it. All things told, obviously some unsustainable percentages, 35% shooting percentage to get him to this goal per game pace in the early going here. That's going to come down, but there is good stuff under the hood here too. In Mark Barber's expected goals model, he ranks 39th in individual expected goals per 60 and 23rd in the on-ice expected goals per 60 rank. So really good stuff there. I see no reason to expect Dorofeev to be anything but a really, really strong performer moving forward. All right, let's talk about Shane Pinto, which is probably a little bit more interesting. I think everybody knows what's going on with Vegas. Everybody is hanging on to those guys. They're not going to change their minds and drop anybody there based on the early start here. But Shane Pinto is a much more interesting character. He has 7 goals and 8 points in the 6 games for Ottawa so far. 96 goal, 82 game pace for Shane Pinto, averaging 18.5 minutes. And he ranks 23rd in the league in shots per 60 and 15th in individual expected goals for per 60. Really good stuff there. Again, you're going to get some unsustainability there. 33% shooting percentage, 17.7% on ice shooting percentage. Obviously, going to be some pretty unsustainable marks there, but really good stuff in terms of the underlying numbers for Shane Pinto. And Shane Pinto is a guy that Blake and I have been excited about in the past, but he's never gotten power play time. And unfortunately, again, in this latest game against the Islanders, Shane Pinto was demoted to the second unit because, whenever you can get Ridley Greig on the top unit to do absolutely nothing for you, you absolutely must do that if you are Travis Green. I can't explain that for you or why Shane Pinto is playing most of his minutes with Michael Amadio and Ridley Greig at even strength, but I do believe Shane Pinto is #good at hockey. The real question for me is, can Shane Pinto continue to outproduce these terrible line mates that Green is giving him, the terrible deployment? He is getting like raw minutes. He is getting those minutes, and he is a pretty big portion of their penalty kills, so he will get a lot of penalty kill minutes. Unfortunately, that's not what we get most excited about for fantasy. And so it's really just a case of whether Pinto is going to be good enough this year, whether this is a legit step enough for him to outperform this early environment that Travis Green is placing him within, or if it's enough to basically force Green's hand and force him to put him on the top power play, force him to put him with better even strength line mates. And that's really where the question lies. This is a pretty tough spot in some shallower leagues, with Ottawa having a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday schedule this week, all on the heavy nights. It may be a spot where you have to entertain the thought of dropping Pinto, even though he's been so good. And that's not a place where I want to be in anything deeper, like in 12-team leagues or deeper. You're probably trying to hang on to Pinto. I am, wherever I have him. And so that's a spot where I think I'm trying to hold on and see if he really can force Green's hand in terms of getting some better deployment for himself, whether that be on the power play or whether that be on terms of the even strength lineup. So I'm trying to hang on to Shane Pinto as long as possible. I think that while the extreme goal pace is not legit, I think that Shane Pinto is quite good and is exhibiting that in the early going here. And it could be, obviously, very small sample size, but it could be a sign of a player taking a step, and I don't want to be out on talent. Let's move over to Washington, where Tom Wilson and Alexei Protas have gotten off to some pretty interesting starts here. Tom Wilson has 3 goals and 7 points in his first 5 games, while Protas has 4 goals and 6 points in those same 5 games. Wilson's up over 19.5 minutes, and Protas is actually up to almost 18.5 minutes, which is exciting stuff for Protas. He was really efficient last year, but was not really trusted with a ton of ice time. So if that's going to change this year, that would obviously be quite exciting. Protas also got basically no power play time whatsoever last year, and this year he is a staple on the second unit at least, and so he's getting more ice time than he ever got in the past because of those factors. I like both players for what they're giving us right now. Protas is actually shooting a lot more, 40th in shots per 60 in the early going. Wilson's numbers are actually kind of down and not that exciting, but the efficiency is definitely there. I think both of these guys are more efficiency than actual improvement. I'm more interested in Protas's ascension than Wilson's. I think Wilson is still basically what I pegged him for. Go back to my projection, and that I don't think I would really change my projection on Wilson based on this start, but I would change my projection for Protas based on the early going here with the extra power play stuff and with the additional shots that he's been able to generate in the early going. I think I would bump him up a little. So that's a little bit exciting for me in terms of Protas moving forward. Shane Gostisbehere I have on here because he was doing very well for himself. A goal and 7 points in his first 5 games for the Carolina Hurricanes. That all with just 16 minutes average time on ice. I do think that was probably knocked down a little bit by the fact that he didn't get many minutes in that game that he left. So that's probably a spot where maybe the average is being dragged down, and especially dragged down just because of the small sample size here. Yeah, he only played 4 minutes and 6 seconds in the game against LA before he was removed from the game. He started out the season with a couple of 20-minute games, down to 18:48, then down to 16:40. Who knows how much ice time he would have seen against LA if he wasn't injured, but it was trending in the wrong direction for Gostisbehere in terms of the actual time on ice. That being said, Gostisbehere was doing really well in those minutes, and you can say that's because most of them were with, or not most, but a lot of them were on the power play, and that's true, but he was legitimately first amongst all defensemen in Corsi 4/60, on ice scoring chances 4/60, and on ice expected goals for 4/60 per the Mark Barber model. So all of those things I'm quite excited about with Gostisbehere. I mean, excited is probably the wrong word because anybody who's in this range as like a third pair power play one defenseman is tough to consistently roster for fantasy. And I feel also pretty confident that in another month or two, Gostisbehere will go through a 5 or 6 game stretch where he scores no points, and everybody will be like, how can I continue to roster Shane Gostisbehere because he does nothing else? If he's not scoring and not scoring on the power play, then what is he doing on my roster? That being said, I do think the addition of Ehlers makes that power play more efficient, and so there is a chance that Gostisbehere can be even more than he was in years past and be a little bit more consistent for you this year. So that is a note I would make on Gostisbehere moving forward. And then lastly here, Leo Carlsson. I'm going to throw Cutter Gauthier in here, mostly just because I want to talk about him personally. So Leo Carlsson, this doesn't include the game from today, but in the 4 games prior, had 2 goals and 6 points in those 4 games. 31st in shots per 60, which is not something he's been known for in the past. Only 74th in individual expected goals 4/60, but second in Corsi 4/60, second in on-ice scoring chances 4/60, and 44th in on-ice expected goals 4/60 before this game against Chicago this afternoon. I haven't looked at those stats too much from that game, but the Ducks did compile a bunch of shots, so I would imagine that Carlsson got in on a fair share there as well. All that to say, Leo Carlsson might be taking that step that many were hoping that he could take this year. He only had 1 shot on goal, but skated 23 minutes and 22 seconds, including some overtime time in this game against Chicago today. So Carlsson has been kind of given the reins a little bit more this year under Quenneville. I think they want him to become the true 1C with Mason McTavish, kind of the... you could call it 1A, 1B, you could call it 1-2, whatever you want to call it. Those are the 2 guys that it really does seem Quenneville wants to feature moving forward. And that's exciting. I think Carlsson could very potentially become this kind of high impact player in the NHL. I just don't really know how to accurately forecast the ceiling here. It is very tough to say at this point. I will say the early returns are very exciting, and I would bump up his rest of season projection if I were redoing my preseason projections today. Cutter Gauthier I want to talk about just because the early returns here have been so exciting for me personally. Just a spot where a player that I was really high on is absolutely doing the thing. 1933 time on ice in the game against Chicago today with 4 shots and another couple hits. He's averaged well over a hit per game. He's got, 6, 7, 8 hits in 5 games so far. So great stuff in terms of the bangers there as well from Cutter Gauthier. Really exciting if you're rostering Cutter Gauthier to think what he might be able to do. Prior to the game today, he ranked first in the entire league in shots per 60. 20th in individual expected goals 4/60, 13th in on-ice Corsi 4/60, down at 77th in on-ice expected goals 4/60. So taking some of those from some range, but I'm not going to complain. It all adds up for fantasy, and I do think that Cutter Gauthier is going to force Joel Quenneville's hand and get himself onto a top power play situation sooner rather than later. I just think this guy is too good to hold off of a top power play unit. And when that happens, that should equal even more deployment than he's been getting. And that will be really, really exciting in terms of what he might be able to do moving forward. If he can be a consistent 19 plus minute a night player, then that means that Cutter Gauthier could have that true pop-off season, that 40 goal season that I was hoping we might get out of him this year in a best case scenario. So that is still firmly on the table, and this is almost the best run out that I could have envisioned for Gauthier in the early going, where the style of play really does seem to be fitting Cutter Gauthier's style, and Quenneville does seem to be trusting him with a lot of minutes in the early going. All right, that does it for Hot Shots. I'm going to talk briefly about the Patreon here. $2 a month is the supporter tier that gets you APL eligibility, the Apples Ginos Patron League. And we do have a waiting list going. We've not had anybody drop out just yet, but I'm sure throughout the course of the season there will be some people that aren't able to continue to play, and we will be using people from the waiting list to get into those teams. And if you get into one of those teams and you're able to, do well, then you might actually end up with a better seeding in next year's tiers. So that might be a spot that you might want to get yourself into for $2 a month. The Apples tier, $8 a month, gets you the same APL eligibility. It also gets you a host of other stuff, including access to patron-only Discord channels where your questions are much more visible to me, and so I'm able to answer much more of those. Access to patron-only live shows. There will be one coming this Monday, October 20th here after the Puzzling Players episode, which is upcoming. You will be able to join a patron-only live show, and I'll be reviewing a bunch of people's teams in that patron-only live show, doing some early season triage on some fantasy teams. And then as show notes for this flagship show here, show notes for the weekly waiver wire show, including all those key ad targets that you need to look for in your leagues. Those show notes will be available to Apples tier members, and the Apples Ginos player evaluation tool, which is what Blake and I use to form the basis for a lot of what we talk about throughout the course of the season. That will be available to you as well in the Apples tier for $15 a month if you really want to go big or go home. The Ginos tier exists, and that gets you everything in the Apples tier. Also gets you a guaranteed response from Blake or myself if you message us, or if you message in the patron-only Discord channels. We'll be able to note who's got the Ginos tier based on your connection to Discord from Patreon, and we'll make sure to answer those questions. All right, at this point, I think we need to get into some have-nots. Before we do that, I should mention, if you're on the YouTube, this is just a look at the player evaluation tool, what it looks like. Big shout out to Mark 18 Skaters and Poppy from the Discord, doing some terrific work, making this thing look really impressive, way better than I had it looking last year. So appreciate that work, and it's a lot easier to digest this year, let's say, at this point. So many thanks to them for that, and that's what you'll be looking at with the player evaluation tool this year. All right, have-nots, let's get into it. Right off the top, we got to talk about a guy named Jackson Lacombe. Jackson Lacombe is a guy that obviously I was very high on in the offseason, coming into this season, and it hasn't gone so well. He did pick up a power play assist at the end of the game in this game here today. But prior to that, it had been pretty rough for Jackson Lacombe. 25 minutes a night, which is the exciting part, still maintaining power play 1. But the shots per 60, 110th amongst all defensemen, 84th in individual expected goals for per 60, 10th in on-ice Corsi for per 60, 41st rather in on-ice expected goals for per 60. Most of this, I think, is some bad luck, but the shots being down is a little bit concerning. I will say that the individual scoring chances for per 60 are at 16th there, so that's a little bit of a better note. Just not hitting the net maybe as much as he should be. And that's also dragging down his individual expected goals for number. So overall, I'm not that worried about Jackson Lacombe. It seems like he personally has been favoring some better looks. I believe he hit a post as well before setting up that goal at the end of the game here today. So things could be looking a little bit better for Jackson Lacombe very soon. If you can buy low on Jackson Lacombe, I absolutely would. My projection has not changed on him. He is getting power play 1. He is getting 25 minutes a night, which is awesome stuff. So my personal thoughts and wishes about having Jackson Lacombe on every single one of my fantasy teams have not changed. So if you got Lacombe, you're in a league with me. First off, how'd you do that? And second off, you can definitely send him my way in a trade. Next up, Evan Bouchard. Evan Bouchard also just completely on the schneid here to start the season. Basically the same amount of average time on ice, over 25 minutes a night, but 4th in shots per 60, 3rd in individual expected goals for per 60, 11th in Corsi for per 60, 2nd in on ice expected goals for per 60. This is a really clear case where Bouchard is just super, super unlucky to not have any points at this point in the season. Bouchard, I mean, if you can buy low on him, I absolutely would. I don't think you're going to be able to do that because of his body of work so far, but really just an obvious case where the points are going to come. I have no worries about Evan Bouchard at this point. Similar goes for Nikolai Ehlers. 17.5 minutes average time on ice is less than I had hoped for with Ehlers, but worth noting that in the last game that Ehlers played here, he did get the full run, 20 minutes, 13 seconds against LA, had 5 shots in that game. So that part looks really good for Ehlers, and I'm excited about what he might be able to do given a little bit more of that time. But 11th in shots per 60, 57th individual expected goals for per 60, 22nd in on-ice expected goals for per 60. And weirdly enough, his line mates Aho and Jarvis are popping off, and Ehlers just hasn't gotten a piece of that pie yet. I think that definitely will come. I think that's more a function of luck than anything material. And so, again, if you can get Ehlers, I would definitely go out and acquire him at this point. I can't say the same for Andrei Svechnikov. 14.5 minutes average time on ice for Svechnikov. He's been demoted down the lineup. 13th in individual expected goals for, or in individual scoring chances for per 60, I should say, but 175th in individual expected goals for per 60 in Mark's model. And so that has me a little bit leery here. The shots are also kind of not there. It's been a weird season for Svechnikov, and it seems like Rod Brindamore just really does hate this guy more than he hates anybody else on his roster, and he's always going to be a bit of a scapegoat when things aren't going well on some of the other lines. And that's pretty scary. It's a scary place to be. I don't think you have to hang on to Andrei Svechnikov in points leagues. In bangers leagues, it's a little harder because he does still throw some hits, and that is pretty nice. And there's always the chance that he gets back in RBA's good graces at some point. But he's off of power play 1, was playing with Kakanyemi and Eric Robinson in the line that got the least amount of even strength time on ice in this last game against the Kings. It is bleak times for Andrei Svechnikov, and I would not fault someone for dropping him in a 12-team points league. Brandon Hagel next up. This is a very puzzling one. 1 assist only in 6 games for Hagel, despite 20 minutes of time on ice. Now, I mean, Hagel, they haven't wanted to put Hagel on the top power play. They've even put Gage Gonsalves up there with Oliver Bjorkstrand while Kucherov has been out with this illness. But I think that over the course of time, they may just have to put Hagel up there, even if they don't really want to, even if they want to save him for even strength and penalty kill minutes. That being said, Hagel hasn't exactly put up some terrific underlying numbers either. 141st in shots per 60, 121st in individual expected goals for per 60, 152nd in on ice expected goals for per 60. So not great under the hood for Hagel in the early going. I think he's too good for this to happen, but I might adjust my projection for him slightly downward. I think I had him around 80 points. I might take him down into the 75-point range. Nothing too crazy, but maybe a little bit of a tick down for Hagel based on the early returns here. And the fact that Tampa is really struggling. I hear guys like Dmitry Filipovich on the PDO cast talking about how Tampa's defense is a really big problem for them, that they're not fleet of foot enough, not good enough puck movers to really get the forwards moving in the right direction. And while the forwards are really good, the defense is really hampering them at this point, and they don't seem to have an answer for that problem internally at this moment. Let's move over to Shea Theodore, where Eichel and Stone and Dorofeev are all blasting off. Unfortunately, Shea Theodore has been left in the dust, just one assist in his 6 games to open the year, despite 23.5 minutes average time on ice. That's all coming without top power play, as Dorofeev has been the 5th forward there, Marner manning the point. As we speculated here on the podcast in the preseason, 24th in shots per 60 amongst defensemen, 8th in individual expected goals for per 60 is Shea Theodore, and 86th in on-ice expected goals for per 60. Honestly, Shea Theodore might be a buy low at this point. There's still no guarantee that Vegas runs with 5-forward power play all year, but there is a pretty solid chance that Shea Theodore is valuable enough, and with this even strength deployment and these 23.5 minutes at even strength, and including some penalty kill time obviously as well. But there is a chance that Shea Theodore is just good enough in that time to be worth a buy low here, especially if you ended up in a spot where you had to fade some D. Maybe you took the wrong swings on some late defensemen and now you're kind of scrambling. Maybe there is a trade out there that you can get done where you can acquire Shea Theodore, and maybe he doesn't get back on the top power play at any point this year, but maybe that doesn't actually matter. Shea Theodore is one of the best even strength defensemen in the league, and often in Vegas has maintained a really high IPP at even strength, so I don't see a reason why that would really change too much this year. And so Shea Theodore to me is actually a little bit of a buy low. Lastly here for the have-nots, Mika Zibanejad. Now Zibanejad, after I put him on this list, did kind of fall into some points in the last game that the Rangers played there. So it doesn't look quite as bad, but still only 2 goals, 3 points in 7 games to start the season for Zibanejad, despite almost 21 minutes a night. I will say he's ranked 27th in shots per 60, 24th in individual expected goals for per 60, and 49th in on-ice expected goals for per 60, 5.8% on-ice shooting percentage. The Rangers, I think, are much better than they've exhibited so far. I do think that it's really just a matter of time before things start to go in their favor. Zibanejad has actually been getting some looks with Artemi Panarin at even strength, which would obviously mean good things for him as long as Vincent Trocheck is out. When Trocheck is back, I would expect Trocheck to get back with Panarin, but it's not a guarantee. I think Mike Sullivan has exhibited that he is more than willing to change things up in the early going. And I think that's kind of exciting, to be quite honest with you. I think that's a spot where Zibanejad could stand to benefit, and I do think that he is a bit of a buy low at this point in time. That's it for Have Nuts. If we didn't talk about a player that you want to hear about, make sure you join me for Monday, 8:30 p.m. EST live stream, Puzzling Players. I will be asking the Discord, usually around the noon hour is when I throw it to the Discord. I ask for suggestions for the Puzzling Players, and those that get the most thumbs up are the ones that we will talk about in the Puzzling Players live stream. You can also join the live stream on YouTube and ask in the comments. I'm usually able to get to most, if not all, of those comments throughout the course of the evening. So join me 8:30 p.m. EST to talk about some other puzzling players. Let's move on to another segment called Would You Rather. I'm kind of playing this game with myself here, which is not so exciting perhaps, but I'm going to do it anyways because it does afford me the chance to put up some of the players that we've talked about against some other players and see if we're changing, some prior held conceptions of these players based on the early going here. So I've got Adam Fantilli, 54% rostered on Yahoo versus Shane Pinto, 48% versus Leo Carlson, 31%. Who would you rather of this scenario? For me, I think I would take Leo Carlson here. The big minutes in the early going, the fact that he is producing points, the fact that Joel Quenneville does seem to want to make him a focal point of this offense. That's not something you can say for Evison and Fantilli. That's not something you can say for Green and Pinto. And so Carlson to me feels like the safest bet here. I think Fantilli still to me holds the highest upside in terms of what we like for fantasy. He hits, he shoots, he scores. Those attributes are obviously really exciting, and if Sean Monahan didn't exist, Adam Fantilli might be the guy that I go with here, but Sean Monahan does exist, and so Adam Fantilli is line 2, power play 2, and I will take Leo Carlson. Shane Pinto, I think if given more of a top line, top power play role, could eclipse Carlson for me. But in the current situation, I would take Carlson. At left wing, Alexei Protas, Yuri Slavkovsky, and Carter Verhaeghe. These are all relatively highly rostered players. Protas at 79%, Verhaeghe also 79%, and Slavkovsky at 84%. Slavkovsky's line mates, Suzuki and Caulfield, have been getting to biz, but Slavkovsky has mostly been left out in the cold, whereas Protas has been doing his thing. As we mentioned, Verhaeghe has been similarly left out in the cold, but mostly by his coach. Doesn't want him on the top power play, even though he was a very highly productive member of that power play for several years. Whatever the reasoning, Carter Verhaeghe is not in a great spot currently. Protas is in a pretty good spot. Slavkovsky's in the best spot, but might be the player I have the least faith in terms of the individual talent of these three. And so it is a really tough situation. I think I will probably default to going with Verhaeghe as a player that I like the most. And I should say, in this last game, he did get back on the top power play and was on the top line with Sam Reinhart. Of course, they got shut out in that game, so whether or not that continues for any length of time is anybody's guess. So I think that I will go with Verhaeghe, hoping that this latest game's deployment sticks and Verhaeghe can get something going. I still believe in the player there. At right wing, Nick Schmaltz, who has been absolutely on fire, definitely could have been worthy of a spot in the hot shots section of this program. Him versus Jake Neighbors, who's been hot as of late, versus Svechnikov. Svechnikov obviously much more highly rostered than either of these two other players, but has produced less. For me, this is pretty clearly Nick Schmaltz at this point in time. Schmaltz is shooting more. He's being more effective in his minutes. He's getting line one, power play one with Keller. Across the board, he ranks 8th in shots per 60 and 7th in individual expected goals for per 60, 24th in on-ice expected goals for per 60, over 19 minutes a night. What more do you want from Nick Schmaltz? I think this is very clearly Nick Schmaltz at this point in time. Do I think he keeps up, 115-point pace or whatever it is at this moment? No, I don't think so, but I would take him over Jake Neighbors or Andrei Svechnikov quite handily at this point in time. On defense, three highly rostered players: Jackson Lacombe, 86%, Aaron Ekblad, 86%, Morgan Riley, 87%. Morgan Riley has looked, to my eye, very different this year. There's been a lot of talk about how he wanted to be different this offseason. He shed some weight, wanted to be more mobile. He's been joining the rush far more often than he did last year. I think Craig Berube and he have come to some agreement where they agree that to be the most effective version of himself, he needs to be given the green light a little bit more often, needs to be joining the rush, and that's been effective for Morgan Riley in the early going here, getting in on a lot more points already this year. I don't know how many games you would have to go through in last year's season to get to where Riley is already on this young season with 6 points in 6 games, but I'm willing to bet that it was like 20 games before he got to 6 points last year. It was just such a rough go for Riley last year. That's exciting for Riley owners, where it does seem like it's a very different setup for him. The underlying stats all look terrific with Riley as well, 22 minutes a night nearly. So yeah, it's a really great spot for Riley. Jackson Lacombe, I think, I've kind of said my piece, huge minutes there, and that's exciting, but can you really compare it to a guy like Riley in a potentially better spot in terms of the power play, in terms of the offense that you expect to see from Toronto? Aaron Ekblad has some good underlying numbers, but has never been efficient with them, and has shown us good underlying numbers in the past and has never actually scored at a really high pace except for that one magical season. Well, that still lingers in everyone's mind. So Aaron Ekblad is clearly the third out of the three here for me, far distant third to the other two. For me, I think I would still take Lacombe personally because I think the ceiling might still be higher there. But you have to really give some credence to what Riley has put on tape and in terms of the underlying numbers as well. Second in shots per 60 amongst all defensemen, ninth in individual expected goals for per 60, 13th in on ice expected goals for per 60. Underlying numbers are terrific for Riley. I just wonder if Lacombe's extra 3.5 minutes a night will actually add up to something over the course of the season. Remains to be seen, but Lacombe and Riley at least in a dead heat at this point in time. And moving on to the goaltenders, we have Spencer Knight, we have John Gibson, we have Cam Talbot. Now, Spencer Knight has been very, very good in the early going. He has a .924 save percentage. Chicago does allow a lot of shots. They seem to be wanting to play a bit more of an offensive style, which will allow a lot of shots coming back at him the other way. But he seems to be kind of thriving in that environment, and that's pretty exciting for anybody who took a 0G route with Spencer Knight this year. I don't think I ended up with Spencer Knight on any of my teams, which is a shame, but definitely exciting for Spencer Knight rosters. He's up to 52%. I just checked on Yahoo now. And then you have the Detroit tandem, Gibson and Talbot. Again, Detroit playing really, really well. Talbot was out of his mind early. Gibson comes back with 2 very strong games, and it probably is going to be just a hot hand situation, it looks like, with Todd McClellan moving forward. So you could see a run of games from Gibson, you could see a run of games from Talbot, or maybe it'll just be 2 games for this guy, 2 games for that guy, back and forth. Whatever the case may be, I don't think you can really lean on either of them at this point in time to be a consistent guy for you. Whereas Spencer Knight, at least while he's hot here, I am willing to roll with game in and game out. And so I would take Spencer Knight over either of these 2 players. And that is even considering the fact that Chicago only has 2 games played this week. I would probably expect Spencer Knight to play both of them, which is probably just as good, if not better, than Gibson and Talbot. I believe Detroit only has 3 games this week, so at least one of Gibson or Talbot will only get 1 game this week, and I'm not really willing to wait around and figure out which one of them it will be. All right, another segment, Under the Hood. This is the one where I go under the hood with a player of recent excitement, I will say, at least for myself. Sometimes it's not a player that everybody else is getting hyped about. This is where I identified Cutter Gauthier last year as a player to really watch this year. And so Josh Stone is going to be the player this year. In 5 games so far this year, 2 goals, 3 assists. In this game on Saturday, only 14 minutes, 45 seconds average time on ice, but 2 goals on 6 shots. And power play 1 time, which is the most exciting portion of that. Second in shots per 60, 20th individual scoring chances for per 60, 8th individual expected goals for per 60, and 34th in on-ice expected goals for per 60 is Josh Doan. Throws in 7 hits in these 5 games to boot. What's not to love about Josh Doan? There is one thing that you might not love about Josh Doan, and that's the fact that his line was the line that got the 3rd most even strength ice time, but that line is Ryan McLeod and Alex Tuck at the moment, and I'll take that at even strength for sure. I'm pretty interested in Josh Stone. Buffalo has a terrific schedule this week, and if Josh Stone is out there in your league, he's 6% rostered on Yahoo. Pretty good chance he is. This is definitely the week to jump on a guy like Josh Stone and just see where it goes. At worst, you're getting 3 off-night games to start the week, and at best, you're getting a guy who may be a streamer with benefits, somebody that you end up holding on to moving forward. It's not like Buffalo has a difficult depth chart to climb. If he continues to show out this way, I do expect that his even strength ice time would increase, and obviously you would hope that he would stay on the top power play. I think that's all possible for Josh Stone, and I want to be in on 6% rostered players with this kind of runway, with this kind of underlying numbers. All of that's very exciting to me. So Josh Stone, want to shout him out here for a tremendous start. Was kind of viewed as a secondary piece in the JJ Peterka deal. Has outscored Peterka to this point in time. So obviously that means Buffalo won the deal, right? That's how it works. Obviously not, but Josh Stone, very exciting first 5 games of the season here. Wanted to shout him out. All right, we do have to quickly recap the head-to-head streamer Deathmatch. Unbelievably, Frank Nazar scores a goal on Sunday here, gets up to 15.3 APL points. Anton Lundell, 14.0 points. That means Blake is up 1-0. Unbelievable. Next week, Blake has Zach Benson. I've got Matt Coronado, which obviously means that Matt Coronado will go off and even this thing up for me. That's what we're all hoping for. That's what we're all praying for this week. Are you with me? Thanks. All right. Well, if you made it this far, you should click the link, join the Discord community, like, rate, review, subscribe, comments, especially if you're on Apple Podcasts listening to this right now. A little review there, a little 5-star review, maybe some comments in that review. So talk to us about how much you love Apples and Ginos. I'd appreciate reading some of those. So send it our way. We do appreciate everything that everybody is able to do in terms of interacting with our posts and our content. We appreciate all of you for all of that. But that is going to be all that I've got for this episode. Hopefully it brought you some value, helps you get a little bit better at fantasy hockey today. All the advanced stats you heard today came from Natural Stat Trick and 18 Skaters. All the microstats you heard today, I don't think I touched on any microstats, but go check out all 3 zones. Paid resource, but definitely worth it. And many thanks, as always, to Matt Creamer for supplying the music for this podcast. That's going to be it, folks. Much love.